convene another discussion with a couple of, let's call them global leaders who happen to live locally. So please, James.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, thank you all for showing up for this on a weekday. I know it's always hard with everything else going on in life, but we're delighted that you could join us for this. Good to see lots of friends and others in the audience. Clearly, when it comes to this issue of the future of work and automation, businesses are at the center of it. They're at the center of it for several reasons. One is they sometimes are large employers of people and workers, and they are embracing these technologies that are starting to automate work. So they play a central role in how the choices that they make about using these technologies. Sometimes when they're particularly interesting businesses, they're also in the business of building products and services that also change and transform how we do work, if they're particularly interesting businesses. And then sometimes when business leaders sometimes you come across rare business leaders who are far forward-looking and think beyond their own businesses and think about what these things actually mean for society. So with that note, I'm actually quite delighted that we have two of them who satisfy all three of those. They are employers, they are innovators building products and services, and they're also thinking beyond their own businesses to what this means for society. So with that, I'd like to invite Jeff and John to come join me. Jeff and John don't need lots of elaborate introductions, but I will say John was CEO of eBay and is now CEO of ServiceNow. Jeff, CEO of LinkedIn, has been at LinkedIn for a decade, so please join me. And we're going to try and make this conversational. This is a continuation of conversations that John and Jeff we've had over many months, actually. But I want to start with one question, and it was sort of teed up in the section before, which is, right now there's something in the air about the idea that businesses are limiting, especially tech businesses like yours, are limiting the opportunities that people have to prosper and do well. And so let's talk about that quite directly. I mean, Jeff, you've been talking about this economic graph. What is that? What is it? And what does it have to do with LinkedIn?
So first of all, thanks for having us. And for those that don't know, James and his team have been an invaluable resource for us at LinkedIn, who are trying to get ahead of and make sense of some of these trends with regard to the future of work and how it influences our roadmap, and of course how we can then create value for our members and our customers. So thanks to you and your team, and it's great to be with John. I haven't seen him in a little while, so wonderful to be up here with the two of you. So with regard to the economic graph is really the manifestation of our vision at LinkedIn to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. North of 3 billion people in the global workforce, some would estimate as many as 3.5 billion people in the global workforce. And for us, we draw a clear distinction between vision and mission, where a vision is true north, it's the dream, it inspires us, but the mission is the overarching objective that we measure ourselves against. It's realizable and hopefully inspirational, and the mission is to connect the world's professionals, make them more productive and successful. And when we started to recognize many years ago, it was probably 6+ years ago, that we're actually on a path to connect the world's professionals, we started asking ourselves what's next. And though there's plenty of work still to be done with regard to the mission, we decided that we should start taking the vision seriously and thinking about how to operationalize it. And so that's what the economic graph is all about. And so it's, a graph refers to the mechanism through which you map nodes or connections. And Facebook talks about it in the context of connecting friends and family. At LinkedIn, historically, we always had this idea of a professional graph where we connected professionals and we created value for them through those relationships. The economic graph is digitally mapping the global economy, and we want to do that across 6 different pillars or dimensions, where ultimately we'll have a profile on LinkedIn for every member of the global workforce, all 3 billion plus folks. We'll have a profile for every company in the world, and when you include small, medium-sized businesses, there are some that would estimate there's north of 60 million companies in the world. We'd like for there to be a digital representation for every available job in the world. There's roughly 20 million available jobs that can be digitally accessed and made available to people online. We'd like for there to be digital representation for every skill required to obtain the jobs offered by those companies. And with the acquisition of Lynda that we did several years ago, it's not only about creating a structured database around these skills and the skills that would be necessary to get those jobs, but it's providing the coursework that enable people to acquire those skills.
So you basically want to be able to connect people to both jobs and give them information about the skills that are needed out there. So that's the essence of it in terms of what it does for people. Is that right?
Yeah, and then the idea is to enable all forms of capital, intellectual capital, working capital, human capital, to flow to where it can best be leveraged, and in doing so, help lift and transform the global economy.
And John, how would you think about that question again? The idea that you don't, how have you created opportunities in the business that you've been involved in for people? Because you've mostly run and created technology-based businesses at some level.
Yeah, well, it's similar to what Jeff was saying. I think these technology platforms can create opportunities. So I got to see this firsthand at eBay, right? Where as always mentioning, eBay was the mission that Pierre Omidyar had of the business was to create economic opportunity. And it used technology to help people, entrepreneurs and small businesses, earn their living and be small businesses. And about 1.4 million people made their primary or secondary living on eBay. And these weren't, these small businesses, these are not, when you actually get to see who these people are, they are sometimes unemployed when they started their businesses. They're often people who or were laid off. They're not coming from privileged circumstances. But what technology has done is to augment their ability to compete on their creativity and their hard work. And what the technology in essence did was take what is complex and mundane about building a business, take that part out so that they could compete. And so it was a fascinating use of technology to enable people to sort of create economic opportunity for themselves and do the work they love, to use Tim's analogy, and create a job out of it. No one was thinking about creating a job out of collar stays or selling collar stays or selling all the hundreds of thousands of different items people sell on eBay.
So I mean, if you pointed to Tim, so is there an analogy? So Tim made the argument that rather than think of jobs, we should think of work. Is the analogy in your case that we shouldn't think of wages but think of incomes? Because you provided a way for people to get incomes in a much wider range of things beyond just their wages. Is that a fair analogy to Tim's work and jobs?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the broader income inequality issues are very complicated. And so mine's far bigger than mine can solve those. But I do think that technology can help people do higher value-added work, bring the very best out of themselves so that they can create jobs.
Right. Well, take that to what you're doing now, ServiceNow. How are you doing that?
It was sort of a similar thing that led me to ServiceNow in a fairly unanticipated way. So we all know how technology and cloud-based applications like eBay or PayPal or LinkedIn or Uber have transformed our lives as consumers. Right, at home, right? They've taken what used to be complex and often tedious or mundane and made it easy, intuitive. They've added value to our lives. But as I reflected about technology in the workplace, no one would say technology in the workplace is easy, intuitive, or adds value. It's frustrating, it's complicated. We spend huge amounts of our time at work dealing with the complexity of technology, and when I got introduced to ServiceNow, I realized that cloud-based platforms like ServiceNow, like Salesforce, like Workday, have the power to transform our experiences at work in the same way that others have done it at home. And increasingly, right, the millennials in particular are demanding the same experiences at work as they're getting at home. Right. And so that's what, in essence, ServiceNow does, is we make the world of work better for people. Right. And I'll just take a small example, and it's mundane, but I often think these big topics like automation and AI get down to our mundane lives. In PayPal, you have your money in PayPal. If you can't get into PayPal, you can reset your password in about 1 minute safely anywhere in the world from your mobile phone, and you do it safely. That's convenience. That's adding value to your life. How many people here have had trouble resetting their email password at work, right? Why is it at work we can't get into our email and we have to call the IT guy, right? And it's a frustrating experience. The IT professional hates it. We hate it. It's frustrating. It's not our money, it's our email. And so what ServiceNow does in simple terms is it allows you to get the same kind of self-help automation to reset your email password as you would be able to reset your banking or PayPal password at home. And you just look at the amount of work that is menial, redundant, frustrating tasks, and how technology can help simplify those, automate them, so that you can spend more time at work on value-added activities, creative activities, much like eBay sellers could spend more time selling.
Well, that actually then raises a question. So both of you are CEOs, both of you employ lots of people, but at the same time, you're also clearly must be embracing these technologies. You're probably embracing machine learning, you're probably embracing automation in one form or another. Let's talk about that and the choices you're making. So where are you, Jeff, where are you embracing these tools in your business and how are you using them?
Yeah, so
And you can imagine the follow-on question, which is what does it mean for the people who work for you?
Sure. So, I mean, we can segment it across at least 3 different constituents. So we've got members, customers, and our employees. So with regard to members, machine learning has always been a foundational part of the LinkedIn offering. And we're trying to make the best recommendations we can and create the most relevant experience we can for our members, whether that's in the feed or whether that's with regard to a skill that you should be learning or a job that we think is going to be well suited for you based on your experience, your background, who you know, et cetera. So for members, we can make better matches by virtue of leveraging that technology. We can also better understand where skills gaps exist. We can do that at the individual level for members. So if they're interested in a particular job, by virtue of their profile, we can see what skills they have, what experiences they have, and when we think there's a gap, we can make a recommendation in terms of the kinds of skills they should be picking up, which, by the way, are not necessarily relegated exclusively to technology. Interpersonal skills, leadership, some of the softer skills that was mentioned earlier is going to really continue to be essential, especially as you have robots and machines moving on to potentially displace work. So with regard to members, that's where some of the technologies are taking hold. With regard to customers, really all of our business lines are oriented around making our customers more productive, more efficient, more effective across multiple value propositions. So for the recruiter, helping their sourcers and their talent acquisition experts and recruiters find the candidate more quickly, more efficiently, and taking out some of that more repeatable work and some of that high volume work so they can focus, exactly to John's point, on the more creative elements of their job, on the parts that machines are not necessarily going to be able to improve. We can do that for the recruiter, we can do that for the salesperson with regard to prospecting and closing deals. We can do that for marketers who are trying to run more effective campaigns. We can do that for learning development experts who are trying to figure out the most effective way to put a curriculum in place within an organization. And then leveraging our data for customers, we just announced a new product suite called Talent Intelligence. So to the point earlier about the economic graph, when we historically have talked about the economic graph and use cases for the economic graph, we would talk about it in the context of locality and geography. So you could pick any place in the world and understand skills gaps within that locality. You could understand the fastest growing jobs and skills required to obtain those jobs. You could understand the skills of the aggregate workforce within that locality. You could measure the gap. And then you could equip those that could make use of it, vocational training facilities, junior colleges, four-year universities, with data that demonstrates where those gaps exist so they can close the gaps, create just-in-time curriculum, and make sure that they're training the workforce for the jobs that are and will be and not just the jobs that once were. We can now do that for customers. Right. So within any company, anywhere in the world, we can help them develop a workforce strategy that is going to better position them in light of all the changes that are taking place based on our infrastructure, our data, et cetera. And then for employees, it's similar to what we're doing for our customers. To the extent we can find these repeatable high volume tasks that don't necessarily require the kinds of talent that we have within the organization, if we can take the robot out of the role and leave them to the parts that are higher value added, that are uniquely suited for our kind of talent and our team, that makes them more efficient and more effective. So an example would be in finance. Right. So reconciliation and billing are things that we're starting to explore, not to displace members of our team, but to enable them to be more effective. And recruiting, we're not we're not only selling these products to people, we use these products. And so to the extent our recruiters are on the front lines of how we can leverage these technologies to create greater effectiveness and efficiencies, we're exploring that as well.
But let's continue this, because clearly I happen to know both your companies, and you're being very thoughtful about these things in the way that you just described, Jeff. But let's just imagine you're the CEO of a large retailer, or the CEO of a large manufacturing company, or the CEO of a large, very people-intensive business, and suddenly these technologies come along, and you can automate things. How would you think about that? I mean, how should CEOs think about that question, where there clearly are business benefits to using these technologies, but at the same time you've got these large workforces? How should one think about that as a leader, as a CEO?
Well, I think these, the word automation, the word AI evokes a very binary, almost emotional reaction. It's going to be the robots, right? It's going to be the takeover of the machines, and humans will be gone.
Makes for better movies, John.
It makes for better movies, yeah, exactly. And then to be honest, I think the other side of the equation is you've got a lot of Silicon Valley companies with their head in the sand just saying, well, technology is great, there'll be no second order effects. And neither is true. The way automation really has the biggest impact is what you said in your report. It's taking pieces of jobs. It's taking the parts, often the redundant, the mundane, the not very exciting parts of a job, and simplifying it and automating it. I'll give two examples. One our own example, and then one of a retailer that we had dinner with his team a couple months ago. So I'll just take an example. ServiceNow. We make automation software, and we make automation software for customer support operations. So in our own customer support operation, we have 400 engineers that solve our customers' problems when those customers call. About 10% of those engineers' time is spent trying to figure out, categorizing what the problem is, and getting it to the right person to fix it. So we turned machine learning on in our platform, and within a week, the machine was more accurately categorizing what the inbound customer problems were and getting it to the right person so it could be solved more quickly and solved the right way in the first time. So you could say, oh my God, that took away 10% of the jobs of the 400 engineers. Of course, that's not what they felt. They felt like it was the bottom 10% of what they hated to do, and now they took that 10% and they applied it to solving customers' real problems. And that's a case where automation, in this case machine learning, is taking a piece of a job or a role, and often the lowest value-added piece, and freeing them up from it. Second example, we had the privilege of having dinner with Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart, and his team, about a month ago, talking about this very issue. And Walmart's the largest employer in the world, competing against Amazon. And he was so articulate about saying that Walmart is a people company, not a technology company. And yet our store associates spend a reasonable amount of time restocking shelves and doing tasks that they don't really like to do and are not particularly creative customer-serving tasks. So they're now trying to use automation to simplify and automate some of the restocking tasks so that their store associates can spend more time with customers, calling upon their customer-facing skills and their creativity. And what I thought was so nice about that is Doug has declared we are a people company first and foremost, and technology is in service to our people, not vice versa. By the way, Pierre Midier said that at eBay. Fred Letty said that at ServiceNow. Reid Hoffman said that at LinkedIn, that technology is in service to people, not the other way around.
Do you think most CEOs think that way?
I don't know if I would overgeneralize across the board. I think it depends on industry, it depends on the CEO, depends on the leadership style, depends on the talent they have around them. I think increasingly people need to recognize it. Right. I think the way I would answer your question, I agree with everything John said, but I'm reminded of the old adage, you can't fix it if you can't measure it. And I think you got to start by measuring your workforce. You got to understand your workforce. And as you well know, you've got companies with gigantic scale on a global basis, and surprisingly maybe to this audience, leaders within some of those organizations don't know where all the people are. They don't know the skill sets of their workforce. They don't know the fastest growing jobs. They don't know where the skills gaps exist. They don't know where there are geographic surpluses of talent and where they can tap that talent and where they should be shifting resources from one locality to another locality. So to the extent leaders can proactively get ahead of these trends, you don't want to be on the reactive side of this. Right. You don't want to wake up one day and see that you've got a double-digit percentage of your workforce that is not, they don't have the right skills for the work that any organization needs to undertake to remain competitive and to grow. So you want to get ahead of that. And whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's ServiceNow, whether it's any organization that's now in the business of helping organizations digitally transform or better understand some of these future of work trends, you can measure it. You can get ahead of it. And then once you measure it, you can do something about it. You can iterate and improve upon your workforce strategies. You can try to figure out how to make sense and make use of automation. As James's team has reported previously, roughly half of all work activities and work processes are susceptible to automation. And I like that language, susceptible. It's not that every worker is going to be displaced. As a matter of fact, the more work you and research that your team does, the more it appears that people won't be displaced so much as they're going to end up changing roles or needing new skills to take advantage of the work that exists. And so in light of that, how can you get ahead of that trend and see where people within your organization can be reskilled to take advantage of a job that's going to be growing? That your organization is going to become dependent on.
Actually, on that note, Jeff, I mean, you must have probably the most unique vantage point out of anybody in this ecosystem, in the sense that you probably see more than anybody what's happening in terms of trends and skills and what skills are in demand, because now recruiters come to you and employees are changing their resumes, they're updating their profiles, saying, I'm good at this.
Google and Facebook probably have some insight into some trends as well. They have a
but on this question,
big reach, big audience.
But on this issue,
yeah,
but
within a
on this
professional
issue,
context, we have
this
some
issue.
good data.
So what are you seeing as, in terms of the evolution and changes of needs, skills, as these as work changes?
First, not surprisingly, tech remains king, and if you were to look at the fastest growing emerging jobs, unsurprisingly, they're related to some of the trends that we're talking about with regard to data. So machine learning, data science, big data engineers, 3 of the top 5 fastest growing emerging jobs. So that's one. 2, maybe a little less intuitive, because it's kind of the converse, is that it's not just about technology, and I think this is going to be a trend that people really start to embrace going forward. Computers, machines, although if you watch some of the videos circulating right now in terms of robots trying to replicate human behavior, we'll see how fast that gap gets closed. But hopefully it's going to be a while before machines can replicate the human touch and intuition and creativity and interpersonal skills. And so you see jobs that require those interpersonal skills that continue to grow very quickly. So sales development representatives, customer success representatives. These are jobs, these are skills that require interpersonal relationships.
Can you make a list so we can take notes?
Yeah.
So people can take
We actually, we can do better than make a list and take notes. We'll distribute this information very broadly. So we have a monthly workforce report, and we're starting to do that on a global basis. And then I guess the third is a trend we haven't touched on yet. We've been focused on AI and automation. 2 additional areas that we may get into. One is what we believe are multiple skills gaps that exist depending on locality. And the third is the rise of independent work and independent workers. And we see that manifesting itself in some of the fastest growing skills and roles. So, for example, realtors. So people becoming real estate agents. I think is a byproduct in turn of the flexibility that is afforded folks with that kind of independent work. Also, I think a reflection of the bounce back in the housing market. And then kind of a fun one, although I think it also demonstrates the rise of independent work. Also trends, more secular trends in terms of demographics and psychographics is fitness. And is anyone here familiar with bar, beret, or bar? How many of you do bar? Okay, so so it's, the bar in the dance studios, for those of you unfamiliar with this. So people being certified in teaching workouts that leverage that bar is one of the fastest growing skills that we're seeing. It's off of a relatively smaller base.
Are you qualified?
But I am not qualified, and for the life of me could not get my leg on top of that bar if you asked me to. So at any rate, these are examples that I think are somewhat illustrative of some of the secular trends taking place.
Yes, so go ahead, John.
I also just building, I think there, again, there's a sense of if you're not a computer scientist, you don't have a future. What a lot of these technologies, you again wrote about it in your report so beautifully, is people creating jobs where you work with technology. So ServiceNow creates ServiceNow administrators. They don't have to have technical degrees. They're working with the technology. Salesforce create Salesforce administrators. And so there's a whole host of jobs being created where you have to work with technology. You don't have to be a technologist. And so some of the job reskilling and training is how do you get people comfortable with that? How do you build those skills? And those skills you don't need a 4-year degree on. It's to some extent breaking down barriers and boundaries so that there's a comfort of working with the technology. Because a lot of the jobs of the future, I think, will be working with technology, not being the builder of the technology.
Just to build on that, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's so important. Oftentimes when we talk about technology, you can see it even in the examples I gave of the fastest growing jobs, which are more advanced technology skills. There are basic technology skills that enable people to be better positioned for managing a word processor, being able to use a word processor, being able to navigate your way around a spreadsheet. I'm not just saying this because Microsoft acquired LinkedIn. I think it's really important that people have these skills. It is a nice plug for Microsoft, but and I think one of the reasons it's so important is not only does not everyone have access to the kind of prestigious 4-year universities that historically have been required to obtain jobs, and trust me, there are plenty of people out there that can do amazing work if given the opportunity, and have organizations widen and broaden the aperture of the kind of talent they're bringing into their organizations. But if exactly to the point of your research, James, people are going to need to learn new skills, especially in a digitally based economy. Right. This becomes a foundational element of that. And there's kind of a slight pivot, a softer pivot, and a hard pivot. And if you have to start from scratch, it's going to be very, very difficult to compete for those jobs.
But here's the thing, though. I mean, I think our track record on skilling and skills development is not great, and it's not great. As countries, as societies, and communities, and the facts are not in our favor here. Companies are spending less on on-the-job training. Countries are spending less on on-the-job training, and the rates of success are not as high. So, and we're all saying that skills are going to matter and reskilling is going to matter. So how do we break the fact that we haven't been able to solve it, and it's probably about to get more challenging?
I think a few different things. For starters, companies have to step up. Period, full stop. There's an ongoing, I don't even know if it's a debate so much as a discussion. Is it the responsibility of governments? What's the responsibility of companies? Companies are on the front lines. Companies see the trends. Companies are doing the hiring. Companies are creating the jobs. Companies should be responsible for reskilling, upskilling, learning and development. So I think it's critical.
And wouldn't you just to build on that before you keep, it's for their own employees and then for the implications of our products, particularly in technology, where the implications of what our platforms do, we have to take responsibility for that as well.
The intended and unintended consequences. Correct. But just to finish the thought, and then we please chime in. And it's not just up to companies. It's not up to any constituency in isolation. We've been working with Zoe's organization and Markle, and NGOs become critical. And we're trying to figure out how to create middle skill jobs. We're trying to figure out how to create opportunities for people that don't have those 4-year degrees, who can learn new skills, who can become certified, get their foot in the door, and kick ass. And we see it all the time. We've got programs at LinkedIn designed to broaden the aperture. We have, Zoe, I think you mentioned right when I was walking in, the story of one guy who actually became homeless. And developed an application to figure out how to assist people finding shelter. He was brought into this program that we call REACH, which is designed for people that don't have the traditional engineering background, but have been certified or have completed a coding boot camp. And these people have the growth mindset, they have the resiliency, they have the perseverance, and they're amazing. And of a class of roughly 30 to 40 people, we had 80% yield in terms of becoming engineers at LinkedIn. So whether it's LinkedIn or ServiceNow or any company, I think it's incumbent upon us to get involved and to start thinking about how to create these opportunities, to partner with NGOs. And by the way, maybe governments aren't doing as much as we'd all like, but there are governments, the US government, European governments, the government in India, that are allocating billions of dollars to reskilling. And hopefully they're going to be able to take advantage of data and infrastructure that didn't exist previously to make those investments count.
So are you both optimistic? And at the same time, what do you worry about?
Well, I think what Zoe said earlier is a reality that I think the last 10 to 15, maybe 20 years has been sort of the I don't know if call it the glory years, if you will, of this new round of cloud-based, mobile-based technologies, very Silicon Valley-based technologies that have enhanced, as I said earlier, the quality of our lives as consumers and increasingly at work. And so there's some very goodness. It's improved the quality of many people's lives.
Right.
But there are the second order consequences of that, which are you're writing about here. And I don't think on average, Silicon Valley leadership stepped up to owning and at least confronting. No one can solve some of these unilaterally, but engaging in the dialogue.
So let me press you on that. So if you were to make, we're going to wrap up here shortly, if you're going to make a call to action to your peers, your business leader peers, what would that call to action be?
It's what was talked about earlier. It's think about your business, your platform. Think about the impact it's having, the positive impact, which we focus on a lot, but think about the second order implications of what it's creating and how you can use either your technology, your product, your innovation, or just yourself as a platform, as a company, as an employer, as a voice, and engage. The solutions aren't going to be easy on any of this, and I don't think any one company or any one NGO or any one government is going to solve it alone. We were talking earlier, one of the frustrating things right now is there's a little bit of a divide between certainly government and business on constructive dialogue around this in this country. You know, I sort of personally was hopeful. I didn't particularly like the results of the election, but I thought one of the root causes of the election was this issue of people saying, I have lost economic hope. And so I want change, some kind of change. And I guess I was hopeful, well, given that was the case, that we would have had in our political narrative in the last couple of years, or last year, I guess it's only been a year, constructive engagement on this, because it's not an easy solution, but it feels like it's been the last thing. It's been off the radar screen, and I think we need to take leadership roles and engaging with NGOs like Zoe's, with governments where that's appropriate, to try to find solutions and try to find solutions. Almost is the wrong word, because no one's going to solve it, but try to make progress. Try to make progress.
Would you add anything to that, Jeff, before we open up maybe for one or two
You
questions?
asked whether or not we're optimistic. I would say cautiously optimistic. I think if you look at some of the longer-term global secular trends in terms of quality of life, the Gates Foundation's been doing a ton of work on this, and it largely goes overlooked in a society that increasingly wants to find the most titillating headline and the most negative thing to talk about. But there's a lot of good things happening in the world in terms of quality of life improving for the 7 billion plus people on the planet. The caution comes in part by virtue of the unintended consequences of these technologies and the rate of advancement, the rate of innovation, which continues to accelerate. And I don't know that we always have the time to fully understand or appreciate the implications and the consequences, particularly the unintended consequences. So the advice I would have is to manage and lead with compassion, so that people who are responsible for these products and these services and these companies understand the impact that they're having, not just on shareholders. It's not just about long-term shareholder value creation. It's about the value these companies are creating for society as a whole. And so the more we understand those consequences, I think the more likely we are for good outcomes.
Well, I'm glad the world has the two of you as CEOs. We'll take one or two questions very quickly before we stop. Peter.
Thank you. Peter Schwartz from Salesforce. We all work in companies that have created many thousands of jobs over the last 30 years, but the country doesn't trust us anymore. And I want to follow up on John's comment and ask, the story has changed out there in the world about the technology industry. What can we do to tell the story differently? Because I share your optimism, I share Tim's optimism. I think, you look at the numbers. In the US, we've created 160 million new jobs since 1950. 160 million. It's staggering, the numbers. And it will keep going. There's every reason to believe it. But somehow the story has changed. What can the industry do to communicate a different story?
Let's take a couple and then we'll pass them back. Throw in another question over there?
Hi, Rebecca, and I have a question for you both as employers. I'm personally a big fan of the work that Markle is doing on rewiring the labor market to focus on skills and not credentials. And yet I will say, I think I'd venture to guess that in this audience, we've probably hired hundreds of people in the past year, myself included, very few of which we looked purely at skills, ignoring the resume and those post-secondary credentials. So what will it take generally to really move to this open aperture skills-based hiring? And what would it take specifically for you both as employers to remove degree requirements and move to a true skills-based hiring practice?
Let's take one more, then we'll pass them back to Jeff and John. One back there.
Hi, I'm Gaurav Tiwari with Omega Venture Partners. Part of my job is investing in cognitive augmentation companies. And one of the striking trends I'm seeing is how incredibly scalable these companies are, and the type of speed, variety, and magnitude that they apply to, going back to your point, Jeff, about the velocity of innovation is somewhat unprecedented. So the types of tasks that can be augmented or automated away. And you both talked about these second-order effects and the importance of companies being able to address these second-order effects, which is aspirational. But do you also think public policy needs to adapt, particularly in the U.S. economy, to address this in a scalable way at the speed at which the societal impact needs to be addressed?
I can't wait to hear Jeff answer these 3 questions. I can't even remember them, so.
You want us each to do all 3, or you want to do like A, B, B?
You get to go first. Pick whichever question.
You're the moderator. All right, in terms of narrative, Peter, we are the stories that we tell, and more voices need to be heard, because nature abhors a vacuum, and it's going to be filled by other stories, and it's going to be filled by stories that may not accurately depict what we're about in the work that we're doing. Your boss is a great example of an amazingly powerful storyteller in terms of the job that Mark does on the fact that it's not just about shareholder value creation. It is about multiple constituencies within society, and we need more leaders to step up like that. With regard to broadening the aperture, I think it just starts with making the decision that you're going to do it. There is a lot of inertia in the system, a lot of inertia. There's a lot of people who've spent a lot of money going to school, getting a degree, and it's good. Degrees are good, and I take issue when I hear skills not degrees. It's skills and degrees, and it's broadening the aperture. It's not at the exclusion of people who've gotten degrees. But I mentioned the Reach apprenticeship program that we've put into place at LinkedIn. That's something that ultimately, if it proves to be successful at scale, we want to essentially open source. It's not proprietary. We want everyone to be able to benefit from programs like that. And we have started to revisit our job descriptions. And that's what I meant about the inertia that takes place in the system. If you haven't already done it, you're responsible for hiring people, and you're in this room today, or you're watching over the web, take a look at your job descriptions. And there may be some sections you want to rewrite, because they're preventing some incredibly talented people from obtaining roles within your organization where they can add a lot of value. And then lastly, with regard to whether or not I believe policy needs to change or evolve to make sure it's creating enough space for this rapid change, yes.
You want to add anything, John?
I'd add to Peter's question. We got to tell the stories, but it can't just be all positive stories. And it can't be just shining the spotlight on the positive impacts of the ecosystems. We've got to sort of also look at and engage with the messiness. And the problem with the messiness, the dislocation, the retraining, the reskilling, is there's not a simple solution. And we're often, I think, the tech leaders are used to being able to articulate a very clear, crisp answer, vision, solution. And engaging in these issues is going to be hard. And so I think a willingness and a comfort to engage in the messiness and have to engage with other entities. So I think that's going to be one thing that's going to be necessary. I'd say on the skilling issue, depends on what job and what geography. We do a lot of hiring globally where actually outside the US degrees, particularly in Asia and in India and other parts of the world, it's a little less degree oriented in the hiring we do. And also which jobs. You're going to look at a degree probably for your lead product manager or engineer for your product, but if you're hiring entry-level salespeople, or you're hiring entry-level, you talked about customer success or customer service people, there you're actually looking for very specific skills. So I think you got to look at which jobs. Then I would echo Jeff's answer on the last one. Yes.
I'm going to wrap it up at this stage because I know Jeff has a commitment that I don't want to be responsible for him being late for. But thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for being part of this session. Appreciate it very much. And thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. I don't want to make you late.